Okay, welcome back to Thrive in the Future. This week I have Cyprian with me. Welcome, Cyprian. How are you?
I'm good, man. Thank you to have blah blah. It's early here. Thank you for having me back on.
Sure. How's it going in Saipan tomorrow? Because it's evening
Right.
here, but it's morning tomorrow where you're
Yeah,
at.
you got a nice day to look forward to, I think.
You're prognosticating for me here.
Exactly.
That's awesome. Good. Well, so one of the things that I wanted to have you on about was everybody's talking about Civil War, that movie's coming out with the big blockbuster Civil
hmm
War. The trailer had that guy pointing an AR-15 at the heroes, which are the journalists, right? And then
hmm
saying, "What kind of American are you?" And then
Right.
that's taken off. It's a meme. The right's been running with it. The
Right.
left acts surprised, which I think that was probably their plan to begin with. And so so that's kind of just it's kind of a weird confluence. What do you think?
Well, it's we're in the scapegoat time.
Mm,
Um, it's unfortunate. Like we have to do this culturally right now. Like this is what has to happen in a culture because no one has taken responsibility for the really crimes against humanity that were perpetrated from 2020 to through 2023.
hmm
And because of that, there's this underlying cognitive, emotional tension that something is wrong, someone is to blame. And so now we have to go and find somebody to blame. And as soon as the red meat is offered, in order for people to assuage this emotional and cognitive and spiritual, dare I say, spiritual need that they have, because they have no context and they're unaware of what's going on within them, because they're leading unexamined lives, then this is what you get, and it's every time. It's how
Wow.
every civil war has ever happened.
Yeah. So yeah, give an example from the past. I could think of one, but
Well, I mean, the American Civil War certainly, but I
mhm.
mean, I think if you want to look to Europe in the last century, or the things that people will be more familiar with, and I mean, go down the list,
Yeah.
right? Franco, the Bolsheviks, the Nazis, Mussolini, go down the list. I mean, you could pick whatever you want. You want to pop over to Asia, right? And you could have what happened in Vietnam, right? Ho Chi Minh and the whole nine. It's Look at it all. It's all the same. It's all the same of something has gone wrong. We don't know who to blame. And the people who are to blame are not taking the responsibility and are not bearing the cross. I mean, I think, the Orthodox tradition pretty much understands about the last century from the priests who have spoken to me about it, both Russian and otherwise, that the Russian Revolution in many ways had to happen because of a lack of the czar bearing the cross, ceasing to bear the cross for the people, which was his job since Vladimir and the baptism of Kiev, right?
hmm
Was that the czar is to be the scapegoat. That in many ways that's his job. The buck stops here. And even in America, right? Like that was Teddy Roosevelt, right? The buck stops here. And so it's like there's a certain point, like, when was the last president who said the buck stops here? All I hear are the presidents who are blaming other people, blaming this group, blaming that group, blaming a previous president, blaming the courts, blaming, whatever. And it's like,
Sure.
well, where does the buck stop, buddy? And if the buck doesn't stop with you, well, then maybe there's no need for the presidency anymore.
Mm.
So it's the same pattern. It's the same pattern.
Yeah, I think the last person who said something similar to that was Carter, and we saw how
Mm-hmm.
they punished him, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, and I like how we were talking about orthodoxy, that quote by Saint Paisios, right? That if I look at the world, it would drive me insane unless I
Mm-hmm.
knew that God would have the last word.
Mm-hmm.
Now,
Mm-hmm.
I've got evangelical friends that would just immediately jump to, the the apocalypse right there at the end,
Mm.
and but it's not the last word at the end, it's the last word now too, right?
Oh yeah, it's always the last word
Hmm.
because there's an order.
Right.
I mean, it's a deep, as with so many patristic quotations, right? It's so much deeper than it appears on the, like, it's every level. That's how you know the word of God, because it's like at every single level of interpretation. Like, as you say, it's not just some far-flung future, it's like this moment.
Hmm.
The things that I'm deciding to do, the behavior that I'm deciding to have in this moment, God is going to have the last word because he had the first word. And he is the word, right? So it's like
Right.
the first word that put everything in, that put the order, because in the beginning was the word, and the word was with God, and the word was God, right? So it's
Hmm.
like God has the last word, and he is the first and the last, the alpha and the omega. So that's it. The first word is the last word. The order is what it is. You're not going to break out of that. And so looking at the world and seeing it in disorder can drive you crazy, unless you understand that, like, well, it can't stay out of, it can't stay in that state forever, because that state is not as powerful as the word. This is a minor blip on the radar that will be corrected. Now, the correction can be quite a discomfort, let's put it like that, but
Hmm.
it will be corrected.
Wow. Yeah, it's interesting, as we talked about last time. So my patron is Saint Tikhon in Moscow,
Mm-hmm.
and I've seen more of the story in Solzhenitsyn's Gulag Archipelago. Towards the end, he talks and actually talks about Saint Tikhon in front of the Commissar,
Mm-hmm.
right? And Saint Tikhon said, we have tradition, we have history, and the Commissar said, we don't, your history and your ancestors were crap, and all we care about is your descendants.
Mm-hmm.
And that gets back into the live not by lies, um, where the teacher said, "Come, child, come over and stand by me. Walk away from your parent and stand on this side of the desk." Right. And and you see that just repeatedly, right?
Mm-hmm. It's the That's the trick. The devil's trick is the ever present. This is what the devil is shooting for. That there is really no past and there is really no future. There's the present. And Orwell, it's interesting because Orwell is explicit about this in 1984, right? Where
Hmm.
the Ministry of Truth, their whole thing is to control the present,
Right.
because he who controls the present controls the past, because that's Winston's whole job, right? Is historical revisionism. And he who controls the past controls the future.
Hmm.
And so
Yeah,
this
that
is
one quote
that's
even,
what you're
right?
seeing. Yeah. That is the quote. That's the
Sure.
quote from 1984, right?
Hmm.
He who controls the present controls the past, and he who controls the past controls the future. And that's what's happening with Saint Tikhon in front of the Commissar, right? Because of course Orwell is writing about oligarchical collectivism. He's writing about what the Soviets will be, and it's exactly what they were.
Right. Yeah, and it's so funny to see the same Bolshevik stuff going on now.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, because and which is one of the things that I find interesting about the use of, like, the word communist
Hmm.
on the with the people on the right.
Sure.
And it's because they see a pattern, and that pattern, the only other time that they've seen it is with, like, what they perceive, the narrative that they understand, and which is not altogether incorrect, about communists in Russia in particular, the Russian style of Bolshevik communism, because it's very different in China. I don't think
Hmm.
they would recognize, there's plenty of communism in China, but I don't think they would recognize it, right?
Right.
It still is oligarchical collectivism, and the pattern's just a little bit different. But that sort of heavy handed, brute, um, in your face, explicit behavior, the real 1984 style, we don't care, 2 + 2 = 5, like, put our boot on your face, all of that, They only recognize that as being communism from Russia. But to think that somehow that pattern began with Karl Marx is silly.
Mm-hmm.
Like those are eternal human patterns of behavior, and it's in, you know, what happened in the Roman Empire. Certainly you had those aspects. I mean, we have the Christian persecutions, right, throughout the early centuries of the church, and you look at those and you're like, oh, looks like exactly the same pattern as Bolshevik communism. And it's like, yeah, when you understand that Bolshevik communism was about persecuting the church, that was the
Right.
primary thing that they had to do, which is why the martyrs of that time are considered the new martyrs. It's considered to be an equivalent of like the Diocletian, persecutions and all of that. It's considered to be just the same pattern.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that people are, the same people who are about to enact this and play this pattern out are like, no, we're going to fight the communists. And because we're fighting the communists means that we're not playing out that pattern. We're playing an anti-pattern. And it's like, no. You're playing the same pattern. You've identified an enemy, but you don't even really understand who that enemy is, because at the end of the day, the enemy is going to be the church, always.
Right. So basically they've got to find a scapegoat. They'll choose the church.
Well, they're going to pick anything.
Yeah.
Right? Like that, it starts with anything, because they don't pick the church. You can't pick the church first.
Right.
Because you'll never be able to come into power.
Mm-hmm.
Like the church is always the target. Always the target.
Sure.
But you first have to come into power. And in order to come into power, you're going to find some enemy that is like, it's a fictitious enemy. Like it's not you need a fictitious enemy. You need an invisible enemy. You have to have that, which is why that was why I knew in 2020, when I heard even Trump say, we're fighting an invisible enemy, I was like, oh, here we go. March 2020 is like, we're fighting an invisible enemy. And I've got the receipts. Go look at my Twitter around that time. And I'm like, well, I know what's coming now, folks. I know that there's totalitarian, and people were like, what are you talking about? This is it's like, nope. No. Once you start talking about the invisible enemy, that's it. You've put it into motion, because it's a pattern that has only one way to play out. Right. And so there's going to be an invisible enemy, and this invisible enemy is taking it, like on the left, it's white supremacy. That's their invisible enemy. Right. White supremacy. And it's like, where is it? Oh, it's everywhere. It's here, it's there. It's like, no, it's actually, it's not. It doesn't exist. You're in a country that just had a black president.
Right.
Like, maybe you don't understand what that word means, white supremacy. Maybe you don't get it. The vice president is black now. Mm-hmm. Like, maybe the people who are telling you there's people passing laws against white supremacy who have the power to pass laws, and they're not white. Maybe you don't understand what white supremacy means, right? And then on the other side, it's like it's the wokes, and certainly the wokes exist, but that's not who they're actually targeting. Mm-hmm. Right? Like, if you look on the right at like who's destroying the country, and it's like, oh, it's all these trans weirdos and things like that, and it's like, that's the blue hairs and all of that, and it's like, yo, all of you who are upset about that and worried about that and scared of that, walk outside, walk around for the whole day. How many trans people did you encounter? How many blue-haired wokes did you encounter? The answer is going to be 0. They don't exist in your world. It's an invisible enemy. It's an invisible enemy. They don't affect you. But you're riled up about it, and you'll start whatever it is. And so it's like, well, here we go.
Wow. So how's it ricochet back then?
What do you mean ricochet? We're not there yet. We're not there
No.
yet. So every action has an equal and opposite reaction.
Right.
Right? It can't stay to everything's looking for equilibrium.
Mm-hmm.
But the further you swing the pendulum out, the further it has to swing in the other direction on the next swing. And really what you have is we've got a culture where, you know, it's driven by it's an attention economy. It's driven by likes and views. And you're going to get more likes and views the more that you could scare somebody with the invisible enemy.
Mm-hmm.
So it's what we have now is Jonathan Pajot talks about this a lot. I wish he was still speaking in these ways. You know, I think he's found some other more intellectual things that he likes to discuss.
A little bit more lucrative stuff than he
Yeah,
likes
exactly.
to discuss.
But the idea of taking the margins, this pattern of taking the margins and bringing them into the middle, and the danger of that, because what you see is people who are mainstream, maybe they're on one part of the spectrum, but they're not dead down the middle of mainstream. Maybe that's Joe Rogan, right?
Mm-hmm.
But even Rogan does this, right? But we know it with Rogan. But like if you take like the Daily Wire or something like that, I don't know what it would be on the left, the Young Turks, maybe something like that. They will take the most extreme examples of this invisible enemy, like the 1 in a million, and they'll broadcast it out and play it over and over and over, and then that's amplified by everybody on that side, to the point where people start to believe that these 2 or 3 or 4 crazy individuals who are out there represent some huge dangerous population of millions and millions and millions. I mean, we're even seeing the same, I mean, it's ongoing, and I've seen it in my own personal life, right? That it's like people not understanding even what's going on with the immigration situation.
Oh yeah.
Right? And it's like, oh, it's terrorists and drug smugglers and cartel members, and it's like maybe they're like, oh, there's millions of, they have 2 things that they, cognitive dissonance, they can't hold it in their head.
Mm-hmm.
Right? It's like, oh, there's tens of millions of immigrants crossing illegally. Okay. There's cartel members and terrorists and all. How many of those people? Right? Because the reality is, what if it's let's say it's a dozen. Let's say it's a dozen. Okay. Out of millions, tens of millions. So we're talking 1 in a million.
Sure.
Like, what, you'd never categorize a group or a situation or a phenomenon by the 1 in a million outlier if you want to live in reality. You just don't.
Well, yeah,
You can't operate that way. That's it. You can't. You will die if you live your whole life that way. You will die.
Mm-hmm.
And so
but they don't want to live.
It's a
They don't
pattern
want to
of
live there.
death.
They don't want to live there, right?
Well, they don't want to live.
Yeah.
They don't want to live because it's not about where they are, right? It's about what you're allowing to happen inside of your being in terms of your understanding of reality.
Oh, okay.
Because you we're like a single cognitive system in terms of our reason and our logic. So, if you develop reason and logic by operating in one field, it translates immediately to another field. And we're actually seeing this like in practice as they're watching the development of AI. And the large language models, which are basically neural networks. They work the way that our brains work. That's what we're seeing. And what they saw was like, wait a minute, we do this large language model and it has this thing where it predicts the next thing. It does it with words, but then they're like, oh, it can do it with pictures immediately without us changing anything. Like, it's the same cognitive framework, right? With which we do it with language, with image, with whatever. And it's the same cognitive framework. I've been experiencing this myself. I've been doing a lot of work on legislation and regulation here in CNMI, trying to make it in Saipan, trying to make it a more attractive place for the digital economy, for people to domicile here, right? And I find that I have a very easy time going through and amending, finding areas in legislation and regulation and amending it to do the things it needs to do, using the same cognitive framework that I use when I do it with software. Right? Because it's just things that go together and variables that are defined in another place that you then have to go and reference, and conditionals, if this, then this, and modifiers and switches of case and all of these. It's the same thing. We construct our code for our computers the same way that we construct our laws.
Hmm.
It's the same brain. It's the same structure in our brain.
Sure.
Right. And so if you allow yourself to begin to corrupt your structure on any topic, it doesn't matter. It will bleed over. You will introduce that bug into the entire system. And now your entire system that you use to live is going to be corrupted and faulty. Right. So there's a hygiene. There's a certain level of mental hygiene that is required in order to live. People who lose that mental hygiene, basically what they end up doing is throwing themselves into a self-induced schizophrenia, basically.
Right.
Because that's what schizophrenia is. It's a complete lack of mental hygiene when it comes to logic and reason and drawing connections, making connections between things. A schizophrenic makes connections between everything.
Right.
Right. It's like things that are not connected, they make connections. That's what makes you a schizophrenic. Everything has meaning. And the other end of that is an autist, right? What makes you autistic is that you fail to make the connections between things that you need to make connections to in order to live. And so both of them are dangerous, but what we're seeing right now is people becoming schizophrenic.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's so when you say mental hygiene, it's like if I had a thought that, oh, my wife's cheating on me, right? That corrective thought, a normal person would say, no, that's ridiculous, right? Unless you actually had some pretty good evidence, right?
Some
But
evidence,
yeah, but
right?
yeah.
Some. Not an example of like somebody else's wife who cheated.
Exactly.
Right? Like that somebody else who you never met, who may or may not be telling the truth, tells you that their wife cheated and that all wives cheat.
Yeah, exactly.
And it's like, if you let that enter, and especially if if you know that this person's incentive is to gain people's attention, that's what they do for a living. And we know that the best way to gain attention is to scare people. Like this is Mortensen, this famous photographer, probably the most influential but least known in terms of like candid or posed like artistic photographs, right? He wrote this book called The Command to Look. It's really cool. People who are listening to this should go and look it up, The Command to Look. And basically what he said was that he had discovered that if he inserted into his photos certain visual cues, visual patterns, that it became a command to look, because we access into a deeper level of our brain. And some of these were like a jagged line, which he said represented like electricity and lightning. He said these are all things that we had been culturally and genetically programmed to pay attention to because they would be important, right? An S curve, because this was about both sensuality and sexuality, but a snake, like snakes, a dark mass, that this represented like what our ancestors would have seen in the jungle, some sort of a dark mass that wasn't supposed to be there at night. Like, oh, what is that? That's a predator, right? So he's got several of these, a sharp edge that's like a knife, something sharp. And then he goes through and he shows all of these various different images that he's produced. Just fantastic photography at the beginning of the 20th century. It's incredible. You look at it and you're like, whoa, This
Hmm.
is, nobody was doing this. It looks so modern. It looks like it could be done today.
Right.
And you see, and then he says, look how I put this here, this here, this here. And you yourself see, like, wow, I can't stop looking at this picture.
Hmm.
And so what we have now is we have an entire culture where we have these influencers, and through either education or experience, the best of them have figured out the command to look. They figured out what to do down to the thumbnails,
Mm.
right? Thumbnails is an art.
Right.
Thumbnails is an art form. It's a propaganda art form to do command to look.
Hmm.
They're doing exactly what Mortensen was talking about. Well, what are the things that we put in a thumbnail that's the command to look,
Yeah, like
right?
you were saying, squiggles and
and
things.
and and either this, most of them don't know it explicitly. It's just through trial and error, like these are the things that work, let's continue doing the pattern, but it serves the same purpose,
Hmm.
right? Because it's at grand scale. And that, if you're not aware, that's going to affect your mental hygiene.
Right. And then we're starting to see that with the AI generated images,
Even worse.
right? They glow, especially the ones that are, of females.
Isn't
They
that crazy?
it's
It's
crazy.
hard to explain what is going on in those images, because human beings have never created images that do that, that have that
Mm,
quality about them.
pardon the reference, but I mean, it
But
reminds me of the 1970s and early 80s, um, you know, porn.
yeah,
So
yeah, yeah.
Playboy had that down, right?
Mm-hmm. The
And
soft
stuff.
filter. Guccione was known for that. I mean, he was the
Hmm.
photographer, Penthouse, right? He was the photographer for all of that for many, many years, and that was why that magazine became popular, was because he was doing. See, I would say this, like, yes, it has the quality, but it's almost like those were a weak precursor to
Hmm.
what AI is producing in terms of its ability to capture your attention.
Yeah.
It's doing some, and you know what? We'll never know what it's doing, because we'll never understand it. We'll never be able to articulate. We can only feel it. And that's in some ways what makes it very, very dangerous.
Hmm. Yeah, because there's something there. It's
Mm-hmm.
evocative in a weird
Mm-hmm.
way.
Mm-hmm.
So, and to even that movie poster for Civil War,
Mm-hmm.
it's got the Statue of Liberty
Mm-hmm.
um torch,
Mm-hmm.
soldiers up there, but there's something about it that has
Mm-hmm.
that same quality. There's something about it that shines in a certain way. It's more than just the trigger of the Statue of
Mm-hmm.
Liberty.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we're in a very, very dangerous time.
Hmm.
We're in a very, very dangerous time, and people have to take it upon themselves to be aware of what's being presented to them, because they're being led into a trap.
Hmm.
Like
Yeah, I like. Go ahead.
it's cheese in a mousetrap.
Hmm.
What's being presented, and the thing is, everybody sees the cheese, but you got to start looking for the trap.
Yeah, and you have to look for that, like you always say, it's Ephesians 6:12.
Mm-hmm. It is. I mean, we know that but it's a, in some ways, Ephesians 6:12 is only helpful as a overall framework,
Sure.
right? Like, which is, we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, against the rulers of darkness of this age, right? Against spiritual wickedness in high places. This is
Hmm.
Ephesians 6:12.
Right.
And first off, it's just truth. It's just the reality of it. But then you have to say, like, okay, well, what do I do with that? You know what I mean? Like, what do I do? And the answer is, like, don't take anything at the immediate face value. Understand that there is a broader and higher pattern. Like, basically, you have to start thinking strategically as opposed to tactically. Like, what is, okay, here's a win for me. and it feels good in this moment, right? But yeah, but where's this leading me? That's what I mean. It's the cheese in the trap, right? Like the
Mhm.
cheese for the mouse is totally good. Like from a mouse spiritual standpoint, cheese by itself, 100% fantastic. Found some cheese, that's great. 100%. That's going to be good for me. That's going to be good for my children. That's going to be good for everybody.
Mhm.
And I think that that's a lot of what you see if you look at the messages being presented. Is the messages that's being presented are all cheese, and if anything, they're actively trying to hide the trap. Actively, like, what kind of American are you? That's cheese, right? That feels good. You see that and you're like, yeah, because you know why? Because I'm the right kind of American. And then it's like, but where's the trap? But where's the trap? Because it means that if you're really going to take that on, then you've got to do something against the wrong kind of American. And who gets to decide who's the wrong kind of American? Who gets to make that choice? Or do you? Did you even make the choice just now? Or does the guy who made the movie poster get to make the choice?
Mm.
And then so you're his. You belong to him now. So who are you serving? You feel like you're serving yourself. You feel like you've snatched up some cheese. This is tasty. This is tasty cheese. Right? The same way that the BLM protesters felt like they had snatched up some cheese in the summer of love.
Mm-hmm.
Right? But the trap. Now
Yeah.
you're locked into the victimhood. Now you can't succeed.
Huh. Yeah, it's and then some people are starting to get the spiritual sense, but they're not looking at it. They're almost like blaming the demons, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's like,
Mm-hmm.
oh well, it's almost like like the stereotypical Pentecostal, right? Oh, it's just
Mm-hmm.
the demons. It's the devil
Mm-hmm.
made me do it or something, right?
Mm-hmm.
And 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 then going along with that, I already have evangelical friends who are saying again that this can't be the apocalypse because we haven't been raptured yet.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So, and I was like, okay.
Well, I mean, I think the demons can never be to blame.
Right.
You can never blame the demons because they're demons. Like, they're doing what demons do, and God is allowing them to do that.
Mhm.
That's part of it. Like, he's using them. He's using them for your benefit. Because if the demons weren't doing what they were doing, then you really don't have free will, do you?
Mm.
And then what's your point of existence? Like, God created us to worship him, but it's not worship if it's not done freely.
Sure.
So we have to turn to him freely. So you can never blame the demons. It's always us who are to blame. The demons are always going to do what the demons do. Right? It's always us who are to blame. And I mean, not just in terms of like the actual thing that's happening. It's not even about that. What it's about is, what is our reaction to it?
Mm.
That's it. Like, oh, okay, you see this story, right, about this parent who's giving their kids hormones to change them. Well, what is your reaction to that? What is your internal state? Right? You're being given the opportunity to love everybody involved and to want to see their salvation. You're being given that opportunity. And that would be worshiping God. But you're not taking that. And I'm not talking about you.
Right,
I'm
right.
saying the sort of global pronoun there. Like, you're not doing that. You're having a different internal reaction. You're having a different internal reaction, which is driving your external reactions.
Yeah.
And you're wanting to satisfy that external reaction with what? Blood? Probably. At the end
Mm.
of it all, if you could, wood chipper, right? You want to spray the blood of another human being all over the ground and their body parts in chunks, right?
Yeah,
And that's your cheese.
that's why you got off Twitter,
That's why I got off
because
Twitter. Which
that
wood chipper was it for me? I was like, I'm done.
yeah, because that was the
This
solution
is
to everything.
demons here.
Hmm.
This is demon city. I can't. There's nothing for me here. There's
Yeah, it's
nothing for me here.
interesting, and taking it from we were talking about the trans, but also from the homeless or whatever else is,
Sure.
no, nobody's that, oh, I can't give to the homeless because they're going to spend it on drugs. But I read today the St. John Chrysostom quote that the poor are here for your salvation.
That's right.
The
It's
rich
not
are
about them.
here, the rich are here to benefit the poor, but the poor are here for your salvation.
Mm-hmm.
And it goes
And
back to
it's
the
not
sheep and
about
the
them
goats and
though.
all that, right?
It's not about whether or not they spend it on.
Hmm.
It's not about what they spend it on.
Right.
It's really not, because it's about your generosity. Because what one of the reasons that they're where they're at in the first place is because of a lack of love.
Mm.
Like if they're on drugs, if they're homeless and they're going and taking money and buying drugs, I can tell you one thing about their life. There's been an incredible lack of love.
Hmm.
An incredible lack of love. And the idea that someone would be like, well, I'm not going to display love, particularly God's love, in the way that I'm going to give alms and I'm going to do this in God's name. In obedience to him, I'm doing it. To say I'm actively not going to do that in obedience to what? Punish someone who is let's say it's not even the consequences, because I love Daniel Persig in his book Leela. He said insanity is not the problem, insanity is the solution.
Hmm.
Drug abuse isn't the problem, drug abuse is the solution. You don't go and become a drug addict because everything is great in your life. You go and become a drug addict because things are horrible in your life and the drug is medicating you. And then you get addicted to it, which becomes a problem in and of itself. So then you're medicating against that. So it's not about anybody else. It's not about what are they going to do with this money that I'm giving. What does that have to do with you? It's not even about you giving them money. It's about you giving them love. Okay, don't give them money then.
Hmm.
Don't give them money. Instead of giving them money, go give them your time. Sit down and have a 15-minute conversation, heartfelt conversation. Let them know that somebody cares. They can't spend that on drugs, can they? Yeah, but see, you didn't even think about that because you're not in it to show anybody love.
Hmm.
It's not even about that for you. Because if it was, the alternatives would become obvious. And that's the issue. That's the underlying issue. That's the underlying place that we've come, where our hearts have grown cold.
Mm-hmm.
And the scripture says that is the time, that's the end. When the hearts of men grow cold, that's the end of your society. That's it. You're done. It's over. You can't have a society anymore. And so that's what we're seeing.
Hmm.
That's what we're seeing. And people are relishing in it. People are relishing in it because it's fulfilling the pattern. It matches the pattern of cold, hard hearts. What kind of an American are you? That's what's happening in that scene. A cold, hard heart. That person's in
Hmm.
hell. They've taken themselves in, they're in hell. That's what being in hell is like. And so if we've got a celebration of people being in hell, well then, to hell with society. Literally.
So what can a person look out for this year to, guard their heart or whatever else, right? To not get sucked in.
Pray.
Hmm.
Pray. And pray with others. And really pray. Like the only protection that you have, like what you should be praying for is humility and discernment. But those are the things that the fathers have always said that we should pray for.
Right.
Like you only need to pray for two things: humility and discernment. Like the discernment of the trap and the humility to actually listen when that discernment is there, and the still small voice and the Holy Spirit is like, it's a trap. The humility to walk away from it, to know that you don't know better. That's it. That's it. The things that gratify, anything that gratifies your ego, run from it. Run from it now. Like now, maybe this wasn't 30 years ago. Yes, you still should have, but now it's such an imminent threat from every angle. Anything that's offering to give you exactly what you want, that's it. Run as fast as you can. The only things that are going to save us in this time are going to be things that are crosses.
Mm-hmm.
It's going to be the things that we don't want to do, but we know we have to. Anything you want to do, anything you want to be doing, run. That's the trap.
Wow. And you've also said, read the lives of the saints, because it puts it, I've seen it puts so much in perspective.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's it. Ultimately, that tells you, again, it just reinforces over and over and over how to bear your cross. That's the one thing that defines the saints in their lives. Like you just see it over and over and over again, where they're like, he didn't want to do it. He absolutely didn't want to do it, or she didn't want to do it, but they were pressed upon by, either there were monks who wanted them to be their abbot, or it was bishops who wanted them to also be a bishop, you know what I mean? But they were a hermit monk living somewhere, or going to somewhere and serving certain people. And it's like, they didn't want to do it. They didn't want to do the thing, but they did want to have obedience to God. Like that's that's the most important, like, nuance in there.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Is to, and all of the martyrs, right? No martyr wanted to be tortured and killed, but they wanted to bear witness. Like that's it. That's the nuance. That's what we're praying about, right? Is like we want to bear witness in this time, but that bearing witness is going to mean some things that otherwise, outside of the context of Christ, we would absolutely not want to do, because it's going to be suffering, it's going to be work, all of those things. And so that's, reading the lives of the saints is absolutely crucial. I do every day, right? Every day I read the lives of the saints in the morning before I pray, so that I can ask for their intercessions in my first morning prayers, right? So it's powerful at that moment. And every day I'm blown away. There isn't a day that I'm not blown away, right? Some days even it's too much in the morning. I'm like, this is too much. This is too much, because it just reveals to me, it convicts me of like, well, you're really not doing anything, are you?
It's too hard hitting, right?
It hits too hard. It's like, man, well, your day is not going to be this difficult. You got an easy day ahead of you, buddy. Whatever you thought was going to be hard for today, you've got an easy day ahead of you. Puts a lot in perspective for sure.
Yeah. Very good. Thanks, Cyprian.
Absolutely, man. Thank you.
You bet.